365 Sports, Chris Lowe, ESPN.com senior writer. And Chris, all the stuff that you've done on Nick Saban, and we had you on right after, has been really just kind of amazing. Just the amount of facts and like points of view you've been able to grab. This is like outside of everything that's happening around college football, which I know affects his decision. But there's never, like, I can't imagine there being a story like this with as many tentacles around one human being, maybe for the rest of my life. And I'm not old. I'm 43 years old. Like, this is such a huge thing. It's got to have been fascinating for you to work on.
Yeah, it has been. I mean, I've done it. I've covered college football a long time now, 30 years. And I understand how big a transition this is in the sport. I mean, and I'm sort of dating myself here, but I was trying to think of another coaching transition in college sports that would compare. And maybe you got to go all the way back to John Wooden in UCLA basketball, and what a dynasty the Bruins had on the hardwood. And then Wooden went in 7 and 10, and he retires. Nick won 7 overall, 6 at Alabama, and then he retires. Both those guys left programs to their successors that were championship programs. It wasn't like they were mired in scandal or the ship was taken on water. So as I went back through, that was probably the closest example that I could think of. And now, with him gone and the landscape changing around him, with playoff going from 4 to 12, we're seeing NIL now. It's going to become not only a staple, a fixture in college sports, but it's going to sort of become the component, I think, that drives a lot of things in college sports. And through it all, he's gone. He's not going to be coaching anymore. And I'd say probably around the SEC, there are a few people exhaling, saying, "Oh, you know what? The guy that's dominated this sport, this conference for the last 2 decades, is stepping aside. Maybe it's a chance for us now to break through."
Chris, everything that's going on, NIL, you just mentioned, the portal, essentially there's not really regulations anymore. The playoff changes and everything that's happened. It is a completely different game than Nick Saban started coaching. If he was, say, 55, would he take this on as opposed to being in his 70s and already the last couple of years starting to think about what his next phase of life is going to be?
I don't want to really answer for him. I know that he told me a couple of different times over the last year that he was never going to hang around just to hang around. When he felt like it was time, if he wasn't doing it at a level that he felt like he should do it, or it wasn't resonating, or his message wasn't what it needed to be, or he felt like it needed to be with the players, he was going to walk away. And that's, I think anybody that knows him knows that's just sort of the way he's wired. So I don't know. I think, at 72, he would have been 73 in this football season. I think that's something that was already on his mind. He promised his wife that he wouldn't hang on so long that there wouldn't be that quality of life to go out and do some other things and really live life. And I think that was a big part of this. But without question, this is not, as you said, this is not the version of college football that he liked best or that he grew up with. I mean, the thing he likes best about the sport was teaching and developing and building teams and players and having them from coming in as a freshman and seeing them go from being a kid who probably wasn't ready to play to being an NFL type player his 3rd or 4th year, and then building championship caliber teams. And it's harder and harder to do that, to build and develop teams with the portal combined with NIL, because so many players are bouncing around and moving around. And if you read the story, Nick said, "Listen, I'm not saying that's bad or that's wrong, but what I am saying is I still scouted myself and thought about it. Maybe it doesn't work anymore the way I've done it and the way I did it. So maybe it's best to let somebody else come in and have a shot at it."
That is, look, he's always been a remarkably self-aware person, but that's a hard thing for anybody, like, no matter how old you are, to understand, like, hey, maybe this isn't for me anymore, especially when you've done it as well as he has. He very much, though, wants to advocate for the future of college football. And I for the life of me, can't imagine a better person to take all the issues in and say, like, all right, here's how this is going, here's how we want it to be. He seems to be someone who could reasonably find a middle ground on things and propose solutions to make it work.
Yeah, he's listen. I think the misconception with Nick is he doesn't want to see kids get paid. That's not right. He said, listen, these kids absolutely deserve to earn money based on their name, image, and likeness. We're past due to do that. What he wants to see is to get everybody at the table and have sensible conversations about getting away from the chaos that exists right now on all sides. And there being no rules or no regulations or nobody knows where we're headed. So that's what he wants to see. Football-centric people in the room, administrators, presidents, chancellors. Let's talk about it. Let's get it all out there. Let's figure out a way to make this sport whole again while kids are still able to get a chance to make some money. Because, listen, if coaches are going to make $9, $10, $11, $12 million a year, certainly the players deserve a big piece of that pie. And I don't think I know he's not against that. But he just doesn't want it to be this sort of, it's almost like we're in purgatory right now, that nobody knows where we're headed, how it's going to get fixed, who's going to fix it. I certainly wouldn't hold my breath that Congress is going to fix it. So people that understand, that are boots on the ground, and have coached, that have been ADs, have been commissioners, they all got to get on the same page and try to figure out a way to get this thing done.
Chris, the Greg Byrne and what he was able to pull off in a very short amount of time. And look, when Nick Saban leaves, they're not going to have any shortage of candidates, but it's hard to go from the list. Every athletic director has, especially since he had some time to maybe think about it, with Nick always telling him like, hey, I'm going to let you, I'm not going to blindside you. You're going to know. And you said in the story that, you had about a year of like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. So Greg has to have that, thought process. But to get Kalen DeBoer and to do all that in 72 hours, I mean, we are in a new world of coaching where you kind of have to do that at certain times a year. But to be able to turn around like that and not get stuck like big programs have. I mean, Texas got stuck twice before they got to Steve Sarkisian. It's really hard to do, and we'll see how Kalen DeBoer does, but to be able to turn that around given all the factors they have and retain that recruiting class for the most part was pretty impressive.
Yeah, the first thing you got to have is you have to have alignment at your university. Your president, your board of trustees, you got to be ready, you got to be on the same page. And Greg was savvy enough to make sure that everybody sort of knew where he was going when he left campus that Wednesday night after Nick retired. There wasn't a lot of infighting or this camp wanted this guy or that camp wanted that guy. And I think that's a credit to Greg. It's a credit to the administration leadership at Alabama. They knew who their two guys were. When he left that night, he knew in no particular order that it was Kalen DeBoer and Mike Norvell. He would have been good with either one of them. They checked the boxes that he was looking for, guys who'd won and won on a big stage, guys who were hungry, guys that had shown the propensity to develop players and teams and build teams. And those two guys were the guys that, like any good AD would do, you don't just have one guy. You have a couple guys, and it ended up being DeBoer. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of names out there, Sarkisian, Lanning, Kiffin, Dabo Swinney. But as they had those conversations leading up to him leaving, Greg Byrne, the Alabama leadership, decided that the two that best fit where they are right now and made the most sense, not that those other coaches weren't great coaches, were the two that he settled on and eventually got DeBoer. Listen, I mean, I think a guy like Lane Kiffin would have done a great job. Dabo Swinney has Alabama ties. They both, to a lot of people made a lot of sense. Dan Lanning. But there are also other factors. You got to look at buyouts. Dan Lanning had a massive buyout. I think Alabama was smart enough to know that Sarkisian wasn't going to leave Texas. He was getting ready to go to $10 million per. Texas is going into the SEC next season. And then for whatever reason, the feeling was that Swinney and Kiffin right now just weren't fit. So, yeah, you got to be ready. And I think to Greg's credit and to Alabama's credit, they were ready when Nick walked away that Wednesday afternoon.
The detail for me, and look, as an FSU grad, was I was initially like a little bit taken aback with it and then thought about it and wouldn't have hated it, was if it was Mike Norvell, FSU was ready to make a run at Lane Kiffin, which I got to tell you, at first I was like, I don't know, because I really do like Coach Norvell, but I wouldn't have hated it. And given how brash FSU is kind of now publicly, it seemed like a marriage that would work. Do you think that being that Ole Miss, while they are in the SEC, would have been vulnerable to that because Florida State is a program who has won and won big multiple times with different guys.
Yeah, well, Michael Alford at Florida State, I think he deserves a lot of props too, because they just were not going to lose Mike Norvell. I think they were scared early that Friday morning that they were going to lose him. But they stepped up financially. They stepped up in giving him assurances that they were going to do everything they possibly could to invest in football with the staff, recruiting budget. And sure enough, later that day, it came out that they were going to pay him, $10+ million a year to keep him. And I also think, though, like, again, any good AD, any seasoned AD, is you're going to be ready. And I do believe had Norvell been the guy at Alabama, that Lane Kiffin would have been target number one for Florida State. And I'm a believer that Lane Kiffin can win just about anywhere. I think he's proven that. He's never really had, since he got fired at SC, he went to Florida Atlantic at a smaller level. He's going to Ole Miss. He's done things at Ole Miss that they've never done before. So I think it all makes a lot of sense. And we saw in that 49 hours a lot of things moving and shaking, at the center of it all. All these guys we just discussed were represented by Jimmy Sexton. And there's a reason that Jimmy is the best agent out there. There's a reason all these coaches get him to rep them, because he's the guy that ADs and presidents and chancellors, even though a lot of schools have had to pay a lot of big buyouts, they trust him. They understand that he's going to, when he negotiates, he's going to be a tough negotiator, but he's going to try to do it the right way. And so it wasn't like all these schools, be it Greg Byrne or Michael Alford at Florida State, were having to deal with different agents, because Jimmy represented all these coaches.
Yeah, he had, just the best week I think anybody in the sports business has ever had that week. And, of course, he was already sitting on that gold mine just waiting for it to happen. But when it came to Kalen DeBoer and, there's all these, kind of cliches about you don't want to be the guy who replaces the guy. He absolutely did not subscribe to that. Do you feel most coaches would be like him, or did he stick out in that there would have been a lot of coaches that are like, listen, as much as I would love to be at Alabama, I'll just wait for somebody to mess that up so that I can, kind of play my savior complex there?
Yes, some would be, and I've talked to some over the years who said that. There's no way that I would ever want to go in and follow Nick Saban. And these are guys, mind you, that have established jobs, that are big time programs, that are making a lot of money. And I think that's, when you have to do, if you're Greg Byrne, you're Alabama, and you have to make a hire like this, you want to make sure that you're not, as I said a minute ago, you're not sort of walking down that aisle and kissing the bride, but they never had any chance, any real, they weren't going to marry you. And I think they did not want to get in a position where someone was leveraging them. And I think from the get-go, Greg Byrne knew that Kalen DeBoer wanted the job. And he told him, very frankly, listen, I know there's that adage out there, you never want to be the guy that replaces the guy. You want to be the guy that replaces the guy that replaces the guy. He said, but, and I think this is what really jumped out to Greg Byrne, along with a lot of other things, his track record. There's only one guy who's ever going to be able to do that will ever be able to say, I'm the one that went in and replaced a legend like Nick Saban. And I want that challenge. I embrace that challenge. And I think if you spend any time with Kalen DeBoer, he's a very forward-thinking guy. He's authentic. He's real. And he's not afraid to be who he is. There's going to be a ton of people over the next year who are going to say, well, you know what? That's not the way Saban did it. Or Saban would have done this or would have done that. He respects the heck out of Nick Saban, but he is going to, in this process, he's going to be exactly who he is. And to this point, I'd say it's worked out pretty darn well when you talk about a guy 14 years ago who was coaching NAIA football and winning championships. He was an OC at Indiana 5 years ago. He goes to Fresno State. And in year number 2 at Washington, oh, by the way, he's got his team in the national championship game.
Chris, the thing I think in the immediacy that was kind of shocking, or like kind of not shocking, but Alabama had to live with the transfer portal the way that everybody else did, in that they lost a coach, they lost a ton of players to the portal because they were probably getting guys because Saban was the coach and you were going to play for Nick Saban, not necessarily for Alabama. But that's one thing. The recruiting class, to be able to keep all of them, really, except for Julian Sayin and one other, was really remarkable to me, given that seemed even as tenuous when a coach leaves as anything else. How was Kalen DeBoer able to go in and keep those guys that the Saban staff had already recruited, for the most part? I think about 92% of the class stayed, and not have to deal with building it up from zero.
A big reason, I think, is you watch his teams the last couple of years, the way they play offense, the way guys rack up big numbers. And I think that sort of sells itself. You say, hey, look at what we did at Washington. Look at how we played. Look at the numbers and the opportunities the guys got. And I think that's one. And the other thing I think was maybe underrated, and Kalen talked about it when I spent some time with him a couple of weeks ago, is you had some real pillars on that team at Alabama. Guys like Tyler Booker, Malachi Moore, Jalen Milroe, Deontay Lawson, guys that were returning, that stepped up and said, hey, we're not running from change. Just because we love Coach Saban, we came here, but this is Alabama. We still feel like we got a chance to win at the highest level. We like what we hear from this guy. We believe in him, his vision. Kalen told me that to him was a real tone setter. As that first week or 2 weeks started to play out, that was one of those things that if you talk about kids that were coming in from the recruiting class and other kids that they were looking at in the transfer portal, that made a real difference. And I think it did, because, hey, they were able to get some guys too. He brought some guys with him from Washington. One of the better young offensive linemen in the Pac-12 came with him. And I think you'll see them probably pick up a few guys in the spring portal as well, because they still got a few spots on that roster available.
Yeah, they're still Alabama, and when that phone rings, I'm sure people will take that call. Chris, thanks so much for hopping on the show. Love your work. Love it anytime when we get to talk to you. Really appreciate you doing this. If you guys have not read the story, it's on ESPN.com. There's so many different things that happened in that crazy time period, and Chris gives a great deal on it. Thank you so much. This is 365 Sports.